Producer Conference online. We had an attendee and a member of Montana Farmers Union asked to speak about a project that's going on at MSU Bozeman with the diagnostic lab. So if Wendy Palmer's on, I'd like to have her speak about that. Are you on, Wendy? Bruce, are you on? Okay, I guess if they jump back on at the end, we can take care of that. But right now, we're going to move on to our... Oh, are you on, Wendy?
Yes, I'm on. Sorry, I just couldn't get unmuted. I think you guys had to unmute me. So it gave me the thing to unmute, and here I am. So
not a problem. So I'm going to introduce, this is Wendy Palmer, and she's going to talk to us about a little bit of a project that's going on with the diagnostic lab, and I'll let you take over from there, Wendy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yes, I'm Wendy Palmer, and I'm on the Board of Livestock. And I wanted to visit with you regarding our state veterinary diagnostic lab. The diagnostic lab is located on the MSU campus, and it is where producers and vets send any of their specimens for animal testing for disease. It's also where we send all of the brucellosis testing from the DSA, which is the surveillance area around Yellowstone. And also, we've currently been taking on testing for CWD testing in deer for the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And then, of course, any rabies testings for any wild or domestic animals. While the diagnostic lab continues to provide necessary tests with quick turnaround times, the building itself is old and is in a large state of decline. And there has been inspection observations regarding the building. The Board of Livestock has been working for years to build a new diagnostic lab. We have had architects get all the blueprints and the design completed, and we have saved millions of dollars, and these are your per capita fee dollars, to help pay for the lab. We also got another state agency involved that will have a wing also on the lab. And now we're asking the legislature to help pay for part of the lab also through the general fund process. And I'm imploring every livestock producer to contact your legislator this session. Our funding is in the House Bill 14, which is the general fund bill, and ask them, call your legislators, ask them to support the funding of the diagnostic lab. This is your tax dollars and your per capita fees at work directly for you. If we don't get the funding for this new building, we run the risk of losing the lab altogether. If that's the case, then we would need to send testing out of state. And our lab is actually growing in testing capacity. As I stated, we took on CWD testing of the deer. We've increased other testing offerings also for our producers. The lab is self-sufficient. It's close to that brucellosis surveillance area around Yellowstone, which is really important. And the board has saved millions of dollars to support this project. Our plan was to pay for half of it. We're asking the state to help pay for the other half because we strongly feel that the lab is not just for livestock producers, but it's also for biosecurity for the state, since we do CWD testing and rabies testing. Oh, did I just lose him?
No, you're still there.
Still going, sorry, it said rejoin. I implore you all to contact your legislatures, and you can do that if you don't know who your state legislator is. Go to leg.mt.gov, and there you can find your legislator, who your legislator is if you don't know, and or you can call 406-444-4800 to contact your legislatures in support of this funding. Thank you for allowing me to speak real quick.
Thank you, Wendy. We appreciate that. So now I want to move on to our final speaker of the day, and an issue that's very important, and that's succession planning. And I want to introduce Andy Bobcajun Junkin with Agriculture Strategy. Andy's no stranger to Farmers Union. He spoke at our convention about 5 years ago and actually went on a road trip with me solving some of the world's problems. As we went around to Montana, we hit a few colleges, and since then his content has definitely improved and gotten more detailed, and he's really found a niche. It's not typical farm succession planning where you work on the 10 minutes in the lawyer's office that the assets are transferred over, but rather what's going to go on the next 10 years, and how do you bring multiple generations together and keep the family farm going. Andy's has written a couple books. Farming with Family Ain't Easy, but his newest book is Bulletproofing Your Family Farm. Now that book is going to be available to everybody in attendance. If you go onto his website, agriculturestrategy.com, there's a free downloadable version that they'll send you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andy and let him get going.
Just want to make a quick comment about that. The book, if you go to agriculturestrategy.com, you go to the bottom of the homepage. It's an audio book. So when you're doing work outside this afternoon, it will be sent to you both as a text and also an email. And all you have to do is click on it, and you can listen to it like an audio book, and so, or a podcast. So you can listen to my book, Bulletproof Your Farm, anytime, and it's free. Basically, the world's problem that I solve is, I guess, the biggest change we've had in technology. Everybody always thinks about GPS and GMO technology, but I think the biggest change we've had in farming over the last 50 years is modern health sciences. And we haven't really thought about the impact that modern health sciences has on how we farm. And for the purpose of today, I'm not going to talk about Viagra. I mean, that's a whole different presentation on succession planning altogether. But when you think about it, back in the 60s, when Dad was 60, he would retire because his hips were shot. And nowadays, when Dad hits 60 and his hips are done, he goes in and gets a hip surgery or a piece of cancer taken out of his body or a new heart, and he's farming to his 80s or 90s. And if you want to farm to the day you die, I'm all about making that happen. I think that's awesome. But the problem we have suddenly is, instead of one generation farming at a time, we have 2, if not 3 generations farming together. And instead of there being one dictator on the farm, we have 2, if not 3, if not more dictators on the farm. And I know I'm talking about your neighbors, not your operation, but you probably heard the term, too many chiefs and not enough Indians. And, on too many farms, we're butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions, and you get nowhere as fast. And, it's kind of funny to talk about the neighbors and the headbutting that goes on in their operations. But we really haven't thought about how much money is being lost as far as inefficiencies because you can't make decisions together. And, with a lot of farm families, when everybody's getting along, I'm not just talking about the days that you're butting heads. On days that everybody's getting along, you don't want to rock the boat. And so often, half the decisions that should be getting made are not getting made because you don't want to step on your partner's toes and be in a disagreement. And we haven't thought about it, but there's a lot of money being slipped between the cracks. The decision to not make a decision is a decision in itself, and it's very profound. And not to mention the butting of heads and how that creates so much frustration. And what I do is I look at, how do you get stubborn farm families working better together? And generally, I'm able to double farm profitability as a result of that. And simply put, all I do is I get everybody from butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions to get everybody on the same page and get everybody pulling the same direction. And generally, I'm able to double farm profitability. It's unbelievable how much money is lost due to miscommunication and egos. But when you think about it, miscommunication and egos affects a farm's bottom line more than the markets and weather altogether. It's profound. And this is the problem I fix. And simply put, I'm often called in as a mediator. The last decade, I've been doing this for about 15 years. The last decade, I've been the guy that they called in to turn around the most dire either farm debt or farm succession cases. And all it comes down to is improving how the family makes decisions together. And when you think about it, Anything you can do to improve the quality of decision making is going to skyrocket the farm profitability. Anything you can do to improve the quality of decision making is going to skyrocket farm profitability. More importantly, it gets rid of that butting of heads, and farming with family becomes fun again. So that's my niche.
So, Andy, I want to start off with a few questions just to kind of give attendees an idea of kind of what you do. So I'm going to just start with a couple questions, and then we'll take a poll from our audience and kind of look at what their situations are. But the first question I have for you is, I'll just use my family, for example. The family farm has been in our family for 4 generations. I'm coming back to work with my dad and grandpa. They are very strong-willed and set in their ways. How can my family make decisions about the farm ranch business together without having a major disagreement? And how do I change the culture of it's always been done this way?
Well, I think, how can you, I mean, your question is, how can we make decisions together without having major disagreements? And the problem is that if you have that expectation, you're expecting sunshine and unicorns. And the problem is we as good farm families, you take a family, the families I go in to sort out the most dire family disputes are the families that have gotten along for years. And the problem is they come across a problem and they have never learned how to problem solve. And so suddenly a mountain becomes a molehill, or a molehill becomes a mountain, I should say. And what you got to get really good at is problem solving together as a family. And anything you can do to improve your problem solving skills on small things, and it will help you whenever it is the day that comes down the road when you guys have got a major crisis, you can get past that. So I liken it to building a campfire. You know, you start with a small kindling first, and then you add bigger and bigger logs as you can handle them. And the same thing with I turn around the most dire situations. I take farms, like I'll give you an example. I took a farm that was $17 million. They just lost their bank financing, and they had several cousins farming together. And they were in a situation where they lost $17 million, and they flew me in, and they expected me to sort out all that problems in one day. And I was like, no, you guys just suck at problem solving. And the problem is that everybody has an answer to the situation you have, but you guys aren't listening to what each other has to say. And you got several partners here. And if you got everybody pushing his ideas, you're always going to be butting heads. So we made some quick decisions in order to keep the wolves away from the door. But basically over a year, we got them from butting heads to being able to sit down and make decisions together. And a year and a half later, they're in a completely different situation. After 6 months of them sitting down, making small decisions first and learning to actually listen to each other's ideas instead of always trying to be dictators, and being able to make joint decisions together as a family, they were then able to make bigger and bigger decisions. So my suggestion to your family, and as to any family really, is that, you know, if you're farming with grandpa and your dad, I suggest 3 simple things. Is once a month, you guys sit down as a family, and at the beginning of the year, you identify your 5 biggest production problems, right? Where are you guys losing the most money? And then each meeting, you tackle one of those problems. So it might be that you might have coccidiosis when you're calving, and when you're calving, your calves are getting coccidiosis. Well, it's a matter of everybody coming to that meeting, having done their homework as to what causes coccidiosis, and then learning how to problem solve that issue. And the one thing that happens is resolve that discussion, and you make more money as a family. But more importantly, instead of your grandpa always being right or you being always right, you guys actually learn to listen to what the other guy has to say and learn how to problem solve. And you got to start with the small stuff first, because coccidiosis it obviously costs your farm thousands of dollars if you guys have it. But, you know, on the day when you guys get hit by a crisis that you can't anticipate, having that skill set is critical. And then simply put, on the monthly basis, everybody comes to the table with one simple idea as to how to improve farm efficiency. And it can't cost more than $1,000. So simple ideas, but the rule is that for each dollar you spend, you have to get $3 out of it. And if you come to the table with a new idea on how to do things differently, your grandpa is going to listen to your idea, because 5 minutes from now, he's going to present his idea. If you were standing in the yard, like you probably were last Saturday, where you mentioned an idea to your grandpa, he's got his arms crossed and he's thinking, who's this kid to tell me how to farm? But if it's a matter of, instead of you guys telling each other how to farm, you guys are brainstorming as to how to do things better together, it just fundamentally changes the business partnership and the relationships. And then each month, if you come to the table, you identify one simple thing you can do to improve how you guys work together. And it might be as simple as saying, okay, if we say we're going to start work on Saturday morning at 8 o'clock, it's 8 o'clock. It's not 8:20, right? And because there's nothing more frustrating between partners to wait on somebody for 20 minutes. But that kind of frustrations, that's what causes partnerships to fail in the long term. And so if you can make one improvement each month from each partner's perspective in your family, that would be 36 improvements to how you guys work together in the course of a year. And I guarantee for any family, that takes your relationships from good to great. Does that make sense? And then that's the monthly basis. That's a monthly meeting. And then I strongly suggest on a daily basis, you talk to each other at sunset. And you don't have to be physically in the same spot. Like you might be, Justin, you work in town, right?
I do.
So you might not be, you're only out at the farm on the weekends most of the time, I imagine. But the thing is, if you and your grandpa and your dad get on a 3-way phone call at 9 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night, every freaking day of the year, and you talk about what's going on the farm the next day. And if there's a decision to buy a motor or whatever, buy anything, you guys discuss that together. And then if you can better plan as to who's doing what the next day, so that instead of your, like, for instance, for you, Saturdays and Sundays is go time. It's you got to make the most of your time. Well, a lot of families, they don't talk about what's going on the Saturdays until Saturday morning at 8:30. And so if you can have a discussion as a family as to what needs to get done, you might not be able to be at the farm 40 hours or 80 hours a week, but if you can start at 6 o'clock in the morning and get a few things done before your grandpa and dad show up. And so they feel that you're contributing your weight. It makes a huge difference to how you guys work together. And then on a quarterly basis, I would suggest that you guys have a quarterly meeting. And in that quarterly meeting, you talk about the budget. If you guys are going to buy any piece of equipment, you talk about those bigger expenditures. And you also just talk about project goals. So if you're going to do a fencing project on the McCarthy farm, you talk about that. And you make those decisions together as a family. If you're going to buy a farm next door, or if the widow next door might be considering selling her farm, you talk about the pros and cons of that. But do that on a quarterly basis. So try to keep the decisions you guys make to smaller expenditures. But then on a quarterly basis, the decision where it's more than, say, $10,000, you make those decisions together instead of one person calling shots. That's a freaking long answer to your, but that's I really do believe you got to shift your mindset of the farm from me to we.
Sure. And so, Andy, if you have people that aren't, I guess, as comfortable making a meeting and want a little help, you've designed a course to help people out. Can you talk to us a little bit what your course is and what it consists of?
Well, like I said, a lot of times when I get called out to farm, it's either a farm debt situation or farm succession case, and it's usually after they've had 2 or 3 so-called experts out at the farm, and everything's falling apart. And really, the methods can be that I've developed as far as continuous improvement can take any farm from good to great. And so it's I feel often like a marriage counselor, where couples have been married for 10 to 20 years and they've had so many butting heads over that period of time. And I thought, when I was sitting 4 years ago, I got married, and I said, we need a pre-marriage we need a pre-marriage course for farmers before they marry the farm. And essentially it's for sons and daughters as they come home to the farm, or they're contemplating actually coming home to the farm. And it's basically, it covers three things. I mean, just the same as if you were getting married to a bride or groom. You know, it covers the fact that, is this really what you want to do with the rest of your life? Are you really serious about this? It identifies common landmines that a lot of folks don't recognize, and then identifies some simple practices and habits you can adapt as a family, so that you can avoid those landmines. And basically, we're doing this with Washington State Farm Bureau, and we have they see it as a, if they can have their young couples taking this course before they go home to the farm, 20 years later, they're going to have more members still farming and farming successfully. And I think that's the same thing for Montana Farmers Union. I built this course, want to do this course with you guys over the next 10 years. And I'm willing to do 5 pilot projects. So the first 5 people from Montana that sign up for the course, I'll do it for free. And just as long as you take it seriously, and as long as it's somebody that's serious about going home to the farm and has a real commercially viable family farm, I'll sit down and do it. And then we can, your board can talk to the farm families that have gone through this process, and we can see about doing something long-term like we're doing with Washington Farm Bureau and a few other states. We're talking to farm bureaus and Farmers Union in those states as well. Okay.
Good. I think right now would be a good time for Lindsay to queue up that first poll as to
Sure.
The different types of people we have on here and where they're at in their operation or succession. So Lindsay, if you could pull up that first poll. So if everybody would just take a second to read through this question and click where you're at, that would be great.
This is cool how technology works these days, eh? I think the one thing I want to talk to you, while we're waiting for this technology. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Is that, 10 years ago, I just followed the traditional business model that a mediator would do is fly out to a farm and try to solve all the problems that farm has in a day. And what I found as a result of working with a lot of farmers I'm actually originally from Canada. And so, for instance, I got a call from a farm in Idaho that really couldn't afford my services. So I started actually working with him over Skype and Zoom. I work with a lot of farms now over Zoom. And instead of, working with them and sitting there for 12 hours or in a very stressful 12 hours trying to sort out between family members, I found that I was able to work with a family over 12 months and essentially sit down with a family every month and make just little improvements in how you guys work together. And it just completely changed how mediation has been done with, and so, I rarely actually go out to the farm these days. I find that if we can have short, sweet meetings, and technologies has just been an absolute game changer. And to my knowledge, I'm the only one that does that, at least before COVID. And I think it's really, I've had meetings with farm families where they actually had haylage cut and it was down, and they were going to do haylage that afternoon. And I had a 13-minute meeting between 3 brothers that were really at odds with each other. And in 13 minutes, we were able to sort out that issue. And the rest of the week went fantastic. And that's because of the technology that's coming available. So I think it's great. Do you want to ask the other question?
What's that, Andy?
There's a second question there to find out who.
Yep. So Lindsay will put up the next polling question. If everybody would look at that and answer that poll. Rank the biggest challenges your family has on their current operation.
And if your family gets along perfect and everything's sunshine and unicorns, you could just write it down as if you're talking about the neighbors.
So Andy, I think judging by the most popular one, it says concern about farm debt and profitability. That brings another question here. It says, many families fight over money. Farming and ranching are always dependent on markets, bank funding, etc. How do families work together when it comes to finances? My dad and grandpa want to make all the business decisions and not share the full financial picture of the operation. How do we come together equally to make financial decisions, or what do I do if I'm never not in the know of our finances?
I think that's a really good question. I think the question you got to ask your grandfather and your dad is how comfortable they feel with the neighbors owning your farm 20 years from now. Because I see the more successful you are as a farmer, the tougher it is for you to let go of control and to teach management to the next generation. And a big part of my meeting process is actually behind the scenes helping men and women who are very successful farmers, where things just seem very obvious to them that may not be so obvious to their successors, and helping them explain things to their kids. And I know with my grandpa, he set up my dad with a really nice beef operation that at that time in the late 70s was a profitable operation. And my grandpa, on his deathbed, my dad was starting to make some really dumb decisions. I'm not going to get into that. And I'm not meaning this out of disrespect to either my grandpa or my dad. I do this out of respect for helping as many families avoid the problems we had. And the thing is that my grandpa, he was a doer, not a teacher. He was an extremely successful farmer. And he apologized on his deathbed to my mother. He says, everybody knows I taught my boy how to work, but I didn't teach him how to manage. And I'm sorry about that. And by that time, it was too late to teach him what he needed to know in order to be successful. And I seen my dad go out and do exact opposite to what my grandpa had taught him, because my grandpa had gifted him assets, but he didn't teach him wisdom. And I then seen the ramifications of making foolish decisions. And not only what did that do for the farm's viability, not only did what that did for my parents' marriage, but also just what that does to man to fail. And that's a living hell you don't want to put any successor into. And the thing is that, you know, I always thought as a kid, a teenager, I kind of recognized this. And the thing is that we had a extension agent. He was a good man named Carm Hamilton. And I always thought, well, if Carm Hamilton had been able to sit down with my dad and my grandpa once a month and they made business decisions together, instead of my grandpa just telling my dad what to do. And if my dad was able to come up to the table with ideas, and instead of being told, no, that's a dumb idea, Carm Hamilton would have to pry out of my grandpa, why is that? Explain to your son why that's a dumb idea. I mean, we would have had a whole different path. And unfortunately, 7-generation family farm that was the first white man killed in the township was the back end of my farm in 1832. It's now growing houses. And because my grandpa, any farmer can give his son a tractor, but very few farmers are successful in teaching their kids how to make that tractor pay. So to answer your question about bookkeeping or the farm financials, you know, quite often it's held back and kept like a big secret. And part of that is a power dynamic between generations. If you don't know this, then I'm the boss and you're just an employee for me. And that's very short-term thinking. You know, everybody's got to be concerned about how are we going to make sure that this farm is still going in 2050, past my life expectancy. And that starts, I feel that the first 2 years a son and daughter come home on the farm, they've got to really prove themselves. You know, they've got to go from good to great and really push out their maximum capacity. But there's got to be a day where they're accepted as a partner or a future partner, not necessarily gift them any assets, but say, okay, you've proven that you're serious about being a farmer. We're going to groom you into management. And at that point, you've got to identify what are the 10 things that a college professor cannot teach a son and daughter. And I think it's really important for you as a family to write that down. Something simple like my buddy Malcolm back home. His dad gave him 1,000 acres. Malcolm's dad died of liver cancer within a matter of a few weeks. And Malcolm had been working there for 15 years, but been doing the same jobs. His dad, he had never been to the bank. He had no idea about the bank's financials. Same situation, what you're talking about, Justin. And the thing is that, you know, sure he said to me, he says, last fall, my dad showed up with a combine. I didn't even know where to buy a combine, let alone anything about the financing of it. And the weight of the world was on Malcolm about 6 weeks after, when he realized that he didn't learn everything that he should have. He had been sitting in the back seat of the car watching his dad drive. It's a whole different phenomenon to learn how to drive yourself. And so what I suggest to you, Justin, is that over 5 years, you have a plan as a family as to roles and responsibilities. And one would be bookkeeping. I really think that, you know, as soon as the son is 23, 24, 25, or the daughter, they've been home for 3 to 5 years, they should be the ones doing the bookkeeping, even if it's not their area, you know, even if they're better at turning a wrench, right? And that's not their finances, not their strength. They've got to understand how money flows in and out. To see combines show up in the yard is not understanding how cash flow comes in and out of the operation. For you to actually have to write out the checks. Now, I want to be clear. I don't think that the son or daughter from day one should be signing the checks. It might be 5 years of them making out the checks and grandpa or dad signing the checks before they have any check signing authority. But I think it's really important to identify what are the key things to make sure that son and daughter understand, so that, you know, 20 years from now, whenever grandpa passes away, that farm is continuing to be managed the way that what made the farm successful. Because quite often I've seen sons who are in their 50s, if not mid 50s, that grandpa dies, and then the sons are in the 50s and the grandsons who are in the 30s. Over 7 years, I've been on farms where there's farm debt crisis because they went out and did exact opposite what grandpa did. And they're going to prove to the neighbors that they're showing the neighbors how to farm. And they inherited assets, but they didn't inherit wisdom. And I think the most important, I would rather pass over a $5 million farm and wisdom than a $15 million farm and the guy not knows how money comes in and out of the operation. Make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
I just want to say to all those in attendance, anytime you guys have a question for Andy, please feel free to put it in the chat or the Q&A box, and we'll definitely get it passed over to Andy.
Yeah, I think what I really want folks to understand is Justin came up with these questions himself. And I really feel that this is your session, so be sure to ask me questions. I want to focus on the transfer of management. I mean, who gets what, how to avoid paying taxes. You can get at any other farm succession seminar. There are a dime a dozen, but there's, so if we could focus on the transfer of management, which is my area of interest, I'd appreciate that, but I'm willing to answer any question you folks have.
So Andy, I think this is kind of a relevant part here when we talk about that. So often we always say that, you know, when the son comes home to take over or the operation, the farm or the ranch. But now, you know, there's women that are just as vital to an operation and want to come home and contribute. So my sister wants to come home and be an active part of the operation. But dad and grandpa are staunch believers that women aren't able to take on the challenge of effectively running a farm and ranch. How does she communicate or show them that she is every bit as important as me or my brother to the operation?
Um, I'll tell you a story about 15 years ago. Well, it was about 10 years ago now. 10 years ago. Buddy of mine got married, and he had a sister and a brother, and his brother was best man at the wedding, and I was at the wedding, and I was actually sitting beside the sister and her boyfriend Brock. The sister's name was Darlene, and you know, she was on that farm. She had been graduated top of her class at college. She had been home on the farm for about 5 years, and they had to get a new milk tank because she was milking those cows so well. Basically, as soon as Darlene came home, her dad walked out of the barn because he hated milking cows, and she did the milking the cows twice a day, and she did all the herd health work. She was just really a good herdsman, even though she was a herdswoman, I should say. And the thing is that at this wedding, her brother said, "I'd like to thank Bill and the crew." And Darlene looks at me and she says, "I'm the freaking crew." And a few minutes before I had gone around, it was a pretty fun wedding. So I went around with the wine bottles, filling up everybody's glass for the third time. And Darlene said, "No, my grandma's here. I've got to behave myself." Well, Darlene, at that moment, she grabbed a bottle of wine, and it was gone before the speeches were over. And then she went to Brock had to go to the next table and get another bottle of wine, and it was gone. And the thing is that it wasn't too far to the point. She started telling me her story as soon as the speeches were over, and then we had her pretty much carry her. They had a bus that they had taken from with the family to take a lot of the neighbors back home from the community hall to their rural community there. So we took her to the bus, and basically what she was complaining to me about was the fact that she went to her dad with a plan for making some equipment purchases that year. They had made a lot of profit, and a lot of that was because of Darlene's hard work. And her dad just basically looked at the sheet of paper, he put it in the back of his pocket, and I guess he never even read it. And then the week after, a freaking combine shows up. And for their operation, they were a dairy operation, they didn't have a lot of land. Combine was not appropriate. And you know, she says, why was there combine? Why wasn't I approached about this? And she says, and her dad says, "Well, I'm trying to get your brothers into farming, and they wanted to buy a combine, so I had to go with their decision." She says, "What about my decision?" And her dad just laughed. And then Darlene went to her mom, and she was livid. And her mom just laughed. And she says, "Darlene, you're going to marry Brock in probably the next year. And Brock's got a dairy farm down the road, and it's twice as big as ours. So just go there. You can make decisions there. Don't rock the boat. It's Christmas." And she's like, "Pardon me. I'm the oldest daughter. My two brothers show up to be dairy farmers at 9 o'clock in the morning when I'm up at 4, actually doing the real chores. And why am I not being considered an equal successor? If Brock wants to come work for us, he can, but I'm not going to go work for him. I'm going to be buried on this farm." And her mom just laughed. And then so I talked to Darlene about, it was pretty obvious that there was chauvinism. And I think for a lot of females, they have a glass ceiling. Like her parents were very liberal, very progressive people, I guess you'd say. It surprised themselves actually about how chauvinistic they were. But you know, when we have 5,000 years of chauvinism, it's hard for us to forget about norms. And they were just concerned about setting up the two boys. They didn't think about Darlene or the fact that she was pulling her weight. And what I said to Darlene was, don't blame the sinners, blame the sin. And the sin is that you're not involved in decision making. And the first thing, if you want your opinion to be valued, you've got to get your partners to actually listen to what you have to say. And then what you got to do is focus on monthly meetings and making sure that those monthly meetings happen. And that when you come to those monthly meetings, come to the table with really good ideas and earn your partner's respect. And that's what we did. And a year later, not only did she get equal equity when we did succession planning, she is now the president of that company. So I think that's the way for women in agriculture to get into agriculture is not off the farm with farm conferences, but on the farm decision making and changing that family dynamics of how decisions are made and being part of decision making. Okay, that makes sense, Justin?
It does. That's a good answer. Before I move on with further questions, does anybody else have a question they'd like to submit? Give it just a second here.
I'd really love it if we could get some from the audience. Makes it fun.
Andy, here's one that somebody had emailed in. And it says, when is the right time to split an operation and how do you do it without jeopardizing family relationships?
Well, I think the key question is, do you have a partners or do you not? Because I think if you've got a real partnership, then you should never split the operation. See, the thing is with the economies, I mean, I really believe that families should farm together in order to keep their economies of scale and to keep your talent together. Let me explain where the 5% of the time I do recommend partners should split up. And that's the only time when I would make that recommendation is when they're not partners. And for instance, I had a guy just recently, you know, his two brothers theoretically in a partnership. Their mom and dad had a third. The two brothers had a third each, and it was but essentially, the one brother, when the family made an offer to buy the farm next door, the one brother knew what the offer price was, and then he went up another $30,000 and got that farm, and he tried to keep it secret for 2 years, but it came out eventually. And that wasn't the only isolated event. I mean, this guy was always looking out for number one. And if you've got a partnership where one person is only looking out for themselves, that's not a partnership. But if you can get two partners or multiple partners realizing that together, you can accomplish a lot more. And everybody's identifying that they have weaknesses and try and turn the weaknesses into strengths and trying to be the partner that you want to have, not just taking each other for granted. There's nothing you can't accomplish together. And I have a lot of farms where we have cousins farm together, and I've been called in, and they were every client that I have, everybody's about to vote the other person off the island, right? I have a few families that contacted me proactively, but the majority, unfortunately, up to this point, have been people that are about to divorce. And it's a matter of getting everybody to realize that if you want to pass over grandma's farm to your grandchildren, it doesn't make sense every 25 years to split up equity between siblings, because you lose your economies of scale. You put yourself up to the eyeball. And I guarantee you that in 10 years' time, you're going to have a farm debt crisis. I mean, pretty much every farm debt crisis that I've dealt with, I can attribute to a meeting that happened 10 years before where partners split themselves up, right? And the accountant made their recommendations that, oh, you guys should split up. You guys can't work together. If you want to pass over grandma's farm to your grandchildren, You got to turn working with family from weakness into strength. And that starts with you, not your partners, making changes to how you operate and becoming the best partner that you can be for be as a team.
I believe we have a question from, is Sarah Raker on here? Were we able to cue her question out?
How you doing, Sarah?
It was less of a question and more of a heck yeah. As the girl taking over the farm.
Okay.
But I like exactly what you were saying. I actually lucked out in my first year. My dad just handed me the wheat part of our farm and he said, you go, you figure out decisions, you ask me questions and you go. And that was 3 years ago. And at this point, he's sitting in Billings in front of a gas fireplace while I'm running around trying to keep everything warm out here. But
Nice.
it was, yeah, I mean, I love that you asked that question, Justin, and I love hearing it because I am definitely the only woman farming in my neck of the woods in Eastern Montana where I'm an equal partner. Like I go to those meetings and I see other women in the room, but they're just there because they're probably the bookkeeper or they're probably whatever. And I keep hearing the same thing where women are just the bookkeeper. They just make dinner. I'm like, I would kill to have a bookkeeper and someone to make me dinner. So yeah, exactly what you're saying is I love it. So it's more of a, yeah, do that.
I appreciate it. My wife farmed with her my wife Bernadette. I should get her to come down and visit with you folks. Anyways, her mother passed away when she was 13, and she was homeschooled, and so for about 20 years she basically ran the farm, and she gave up what she was. Her dad died a few months before I met her. I was able to convince her to marry me after the fourth date because she'd always expected to farm, but she realizes how important this message is to change the dynamics of decision making on the farm is the only way we're going to change the opportunity for women in agriculture. And so she's a big part of what I do, and she's definitely a farm her, and she would. I mean, when we're in Montana, we'll have to you'll have to meet Bernadette sometime. She would love to meet you, Sarah.
I'm in. We have a great women's conference out of Hot Springs every year. I'm just saying, besides this year, somewhere in February.
Hot Springs sounds good. So
exactly. We'll find a way to bring you back.
That sounds good. That sounds awesome.
Thank you.
Yep.
Do we have any other questions from the audience?
This is Cindy Palmer. I'm under Walter's thing. And I guess we have daughters who are in their early 30s. It says, oh, hold on just a sec. Start my video. There.
How you
doing? And we, like, one's in Norway right now. She's a research scientist and attorney, and I had assumed 0% chance that they wanted to farm.
Yeah.
Both of them could drive any tractor on the place, help us all the time with busy periods, plan visiting home when we have stuff to do. So they clearly like it. And a speaker like you had said, don't assume, ask. And so I threw it out there, like, what's the chance you guys would ever want to farm? And was shocked that they were like, what, 20%? Because I was so positive it would be 0. Yeah. So we're getting up there in age. I love my neighbors. I actually have pretty good neighbors right now, but I still don't want to sell my farm to them. I would love to see another family come in here and take it over. There's actually a Farmers Union member who is not related to some farmers, and clearly they're working to transition their farm to him. And I would be open to something like that, but how do you find that person, those people? Do you know of any organizations that you would recommend?
I think there's a few farm organizations. I mean, you ask a lot of questions right there, but I think there's a few farm organizations. I think the biggest thing is that, you know, I often see as somebody who, like right now, I'm dealing with a farm family where they're farming a lot of acres, and it's pretty obvious that there's no interest. I mean, the son has worked on the farm for 20 years, and essentially as an underpaid slave, and you know, there's no intent to pass over the farm to him. There's an uncle that just plans to sell the farm for as much as he can get out of it. And you know, you see sad cases like that a lot, unfortunately. And you know, a lot of times I'm able to save them, but there's always that 5% where, I mean, you're just dealing with interesting people, I guess you'd say. And so I find that sad. So quite often I get called by folks, and they want they don't have a successor, but they want the farm to continue, and it's a viable operation. And then I match them with people who really would give their left arm to farm. You know, there's a lot of people that say they want to farm, but the question is, how serious are you? And I always ask that question. To answer your first question, I think there's a lot of, with COVID especially, there's a lot of family farms where I'm just going to answer this. Maybe it's not really directly related to what you're saying, but the thing is, there's a lot of farms where there's 2-3 kids involved in the farming operation, and they've been part of the farm for 10 years. And then suddenly they have what I call COVID kids. So I have one farm from Texas, and the son went off to California, and he was a chef, and he lived that lifestyle. And then he came home because of COVID, and he's been working there for 6 months, and he loves it. And he's fit into the operation into a role that is needed. They're a very large dairy operation. And the key thing I have for any family operation is whether your son's son or daughter are 22 or they're 42, is that they got to spend 2 years, or not just 2 years, I say at least 5,000 hours, maybe 10,000 hours, proving that they really want to come home and be a partner. You know, they've got to prove that this just the same as if you went to a law firm, you graduate from college as a lawyer, that doesn't make you a lawyer. You know, that doesn't make you a partner at a law firm. You've got to earn it. And I think that it's really important for every family farm to do that, but also to have a statement that after so many hours, we're going to sit down, we're going to talk about how to incorporate you as a partner in this operation. That does not necessarily going to gift them 25% of the farm at that moment, but you should give them a guide as to how they could earn their way into the operation in the future, and have a discussion about how they can grow the operation so that in 2050 it's still going to be successful. And I think that's a very important conversation for you folks to have. But first of all, have your son and daughter come home for 2 years. And then what I suggest is during that time is have a performance review. And so during that performance review, every quarter, you sit down, you identify a couple things that they could improve on, both in terms of their work performance and also the character. And then also identify a couple skills that they could learn, like learning how to do bookkeeping and taking over that responsibility. And so basically always be improving themselves. So after 90 days, review their performance. If it wasn't satisfactory, if you had at the beginning of the 90 days said, okay, Joel, you need to stop sleeping in, right? I had a farm where the son, he wanted to farm, he said, but they started chores at 6 o'clock in the morning. And a lot of time he didn't show up till 7:30 in the morning. The rest of the time, he was a perfect kid. He worked hard, but he had that fault. And you know what I want to see is every 90 days, your son and daughter turning a weakness into a strength, And if they're able to do that for 8 periods of time, that shows me that they're serious about turn their weaknesses into strengths, and that they have a potential as a manager on the farm. If you have a son or daughter that just simply sleep in or continue delinquent behavior that would not be acceptable if they worked at an off-farm job, they're not potential successors, right? They might inherit the assets, but they're not going to be somebody that's going to inherit a business and be able to make that business grow. So before you start talking about succession planning, I want your son and daughter to really prove that they want the opportunity to be considered a partner and have a process of continuous improvement. And it will be a game changer. But I really think also that I see a lot of families that they haven't had that discussion, and the son and daughter have been at home on the farm for 20 years, and they're still waiting for that discussion. And so I think after 5,000 hours, it's important to have that discussion. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think the other thing, sorry about this, is that if you have an employee that you might be interested in giving them the opportunity to be a partner, you say to them, look, we are interested in potentially giving you the opportunity, but we want to take you from good to great before we have that discussion about the transfer of assets. Because I have dealt with a lot of situations where they've tried to set up a farm kid, a non-relative, into ownership in the partnership, and after 5 years, they're talking about a lot of delinquent activity. And before take them from good to great before you give them the opportunity to become a manager, and then have that process continue after that, where they're always improving themselves, always becoming better, both as far as a businessman or a businesswoman, and as far as a farmer, and also just as an individual. And if you get that in somebody that's a non-relative, that's going to be a great place for your money to lie.
Thank you.
Andy, we had another question from one of the attendees, and it says, do you have any standout advice for a husband-wife partnership?
Do you have any stand-up advice for a husband-wife partnership? Maybe I should call Bernadette down and she could tell you what the advice is. But I think whether it's a husband and wife, I always get often asked about in-law relationships, and I think that, how do you make in-law relationships work? And I think this is the same thing. Is we got to ask ourselves what makes a successful marriage. And it's not a situation where one person's talking and the other person is not listening. What makes a successful marriage is getting past this concept of stubborn. And instead of always talking and not listening to what your partner has to say, getting really good at listening and really good at communicating, and understanding that they have a different worldview than you do, and trying to understand that perspective, and getting really good at brainstorming options instead of always saying this is the way it's going to be. I mean, somebody that's a dictator in a marriage, that's not going to be a marriage that lasts. And especially in a business partnership, you got to listen to each other, have the same goals, be working towards those same goals, and have accountability. I mean, there's no, if you say you're going to do something, following through and actually getting it done is absolutely critical. So I think that's how you have a successful marriage as far as a business partnership. I also think that's how you have a successful relationship with your in-laws. There's a lot of times in-laws don't listen to each other. They talk, but they don't try to understand what that person's perspective is. And that fails. And so I think that's critical to understand as well. And so I think that having a time and place really, the same thing is having a time and place once a month to talk about ways to improve the business, and really planning the next day so that the right hand knows what the left hand is doing, regardless of the size of the operation, whether it's just a husband and wife or 5, 6 partners. That is key. Okay.
Andy, we have another question, and it says, are there any good places to research best practices for equity disbursements you would recommend?
I really don't want to touch equity because frankly, every other succession planning seminar, everybody focuses on that 10 minutes, you transfer the assets, who gets what, how to avoid paying taxes. And I think it's the most foolish thing ever. I mean, it's a weekend course, at taught, there's quite a few people that tout themselves as far as succession experts. Taxes are the easiest thing to figure that out. So I recommend this search engine called Google. I mean, it works fine. But I mean, as far as if you're concerned about the transfer of assets, I guarantee you, and how to avoid paying taxes, and that's your only concern when it comes to succession planning, I guarantee you that unfortunately, I'm going to have a conversation with you in 10 years' time, and you're going to be crying at 11:30 at night. See, a lot of farm families, they think that their only concern is how to avoid paying taxes. They don't realize that the biggest challenges you're going to have with working with your partners is going from button heads to being able to sit down and make decisions and pull in the same direction.
They appreciate that response, Andy.
I didn't mean to be mean, but I just want you to avoid fate 20. Because I've been at farm shows for so many years and seen 10, now it's 15 years later, have these people come to me after I gave them that response, and then 15 years later come to me and say, you know what, you were right. And you don't want to go through that drama.
Hi there. We have a question from the Q&A box.
Great.
It says, how do you promote motivation without coming across as bossy? I hear a lot, you're always my boss and not my dad.
Well, I think that motivation is a huge issue. And you've got to make sure that everybody's equally aligned on the same goals and everybody's equally driven on the same goals. I mean, Michael Jordan, you look at, I think we have a big problem in farming where a lot of farm families, for instance, they constantly bicker as to work-life balance, and they constantly bicker about life goals as well. And you look at an NBA team, okay, or just let's talk about college basketball. 40 years ago, you just had to be in the lucky sperm club, right? As far as getting the right height and the right frame. And you just had to have a little bit of talent in order to get on the college basketball team. You just had, when you try out for the college basketball team, you just had to be better than average. But nowadays, what does it take to be getting on the college basketball team? You have to have exceptional drive. I mean, you have to be the best of the best. You have to be in the top, not 1%, top 0.01%. And I think that in farming, we always, it used to be, a banker told me once, he said, this is just a few years ago. He said, I always told my farmers that you just have to be better than average. He said, it's always the bottom 10% of farms that fail, whether it's caused by economic issues or drought or whatever. Always the bottom 10% fail. But as long as you're better than average, you're fine. And the banker said to me, in the next 10 years, we're going to be lucky to have 10% of farms still around. He said, this is what the banker said. Now, I mean, the market forecaster this morning, nobody has a crystal ball, but this is what he said. He said, like, the Chinese, they're putting as much money into clearing the rainforest in Brazil. There's going to be as much productive agricultural land cleared in the next 5 years. as there is productive agricultural land in the Midwest. He says the GMO technology, you look at, we've had 50% increase in corn yields since 1990. We're going to have the same in the next 5 years. What happens when you increase production? Prices go down. What happens when prices go down? Only a few survive. And, I think the thing is that, when it comes to motivation, if you want to farm professionally, now, if you want to farm as a hobby, you can just keep on going the way you are. But if you want to farm professionally in 20 years time, you've got to have a whole different game, and somebody that's in high school right now, that's a big, tall kid, that likes basketball, they realize that they're going to have to work their butt off to develop themselves in order to even be able to try out for the basketball team in 10 years time. And it's the same thing with farming. If you want to be farming 20 years from now, you got to have exceptional drive. And, I think Arnold Schwarzenegger, he said it the best, and that's the same, whether it's college basketball or you look at software development or any type of business, you have to be at a whole different level. It used to be 40 years ago, you just had to have some talent in order to develop software. Well, now there's only one Google, right? There's only one in the industry. You have to be the best. And it's the same thing for farming. And I think that sometimes we feel that because we inherited it from a grandfather, that we're going to be able to pass it over to our grandchildren. And you've got to really check yourself as to how realistic that is. You've got to really realize that you've got to work your butt off to be able to make that happen. Arnold Schwarzenegger, he said it the best. He says, in order to get ahead in life, you've got to work your butt off. He says, you got to sleep 6 hours. That out of 24 hours, everybody only gets 24 hours in a day. That leaves you 18 hours. And you show me how you spend those 18 hours. I'll show you where you're going to be in 10 years time. Or 18 years time, he said. And the thing is that, there's only 18 hours in the day. The question is, how do you spend that? And the reason why I'm talking about Arnold Schwarzenegger is that, this quote is often used by successful software CEOs. And I think when it comes to the argument about work-life balance and motivation, when you take on the opportunity to take over grandma's farm, there's an implication that you're going to be driven to do whatever it takes to pass it over to your grandchildren. But I think what we have to understand is the importance of work-life balance. And to ask your user, I think that if you want to take over the farm, you got to actually work more hours than the parents did. But you got to be more productive with those hours too. You can't just work hard. You got to work smart with every hour. But the challenge we have is, how do you spend your time beyond the farm? So let's say you're working 12-hour days. Do you come home at night and you watch TV and tell your kids that they're in the way? Or do you get on your knees and play with toys with your kids? And I think that with a lot of farm families, we have a sense of entitlement that the business will be fine, and a sense of entitlement that the marriage will be fine. We got to assume that we're the underdog. We got to look at the fact that over 50% of family farms fail every generation. It might be higher for our generation. Same thing with marriages. Over 50% of marriages fail. And we got to assume, instead of thinking everything will be fine, that you're the underdog. And the way you overcome that is your motivation to be the best at your marriage, and to have a very successful marriage and a successful business. And only by having hyper-focused motivation are you going to have success in life all around. It's not going to be given to you. You've got to make it happen. And that's through time management. Does that make sense?
Yes. So Andy, I think a good way to kind of wrap up this session would be to answer this last question, and then revisit the offer for your course on agriculturestrategy.com, and talk about the free book that they're eligible to get off your website. But the last question, and I think it's one that really hits home to a lot of what's going on right now, is suicide rates are at an all-time high in farming and ranching. What are some of the things we can do as a family to change or improve mental health in our family operation?
Well, I think when a farmer throws a rope over a barn beam, that is a definite decision with long-term consequences. And that farmer is saying to the world, there is no other options. There is no other way to solve my problems. But there always is a different options, isn't there? And the problem we have, we talk about succession plan, we talk about farm suicides. And we're always focused on what goes on in the man's or woman's mind 10 minutes before they jump off that barn beam and swing from the rafters. They talk about mental health and we talk about farm economics. We don't talk about the fact that for 10 years before that moment, on that family operation, you have everybody butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions. And we have a situation where everybody is saying to each other every day, there's only one way to do it, and it's my way or the highway. We have a problem with being stubborn. And it's the whole stubborn mentality saying this is the only way we can do it that leads to these inefficiencies in farm profitability. And also the butting of heads that causes the family relationships to fall so far apart that you got the headaches that lead up to a man thinking that it's a good decision to jump off a barn beam. And there is one way to solve this problem. And it's as simple as it's on the edge of my fingertips. You know what that is? Instead of looking at things one way, we got to look at things 5 different ways. For every problem you identify on your farm, you've got to go to your partner and say, hey, I see this problem. It's not your fault, not my fault. The question is, it doesn't matter whose fault it is. The question is, how can we fix it? And start brainstorming, not one idea, 5 ideas. Go to your partner with 2 or 3 ideas as to how to go about it. And then make sure you listen to them and prompt them to brainstorm other options. And always, before you start making any decision, come up with at least 5 different options, because I guarantee it might take an extra 5 minutes, but that 4th and that 5th idea you brainstorm might be something you never would have considered. And it might be a game changer. Well, it is going to be a game changer. I can tell you that, as to your profitability in 5 years' time. And if you can listen to each other, if you learn how to listen to each other instead of butting heads, and learn to respect each other as partners, it's unbelievable where your farm is going to be. And I guarantee you, you won't be in a situation 5 years from now where you have somebody that you love actually sitting on a barn beam thinking jumping is a good decision. We got to change how we deal with change. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And so, Andy, I guess to close, why don't you visit one more time a little bit about the course that you're offering members, and then once again, his book, How to Bulletproof Your Farm, is available for a free download if you visit his site, agriculturestrategy.com.
Yeah. Basically, I really think Justin and I actually talked about the idea of this course about 5 years ago. I came to speak, I think it was 5 or 6 years. I forget how many years ago it was that I came and spoke in Montana. But when we were driving around in the truck going to these colleges, we talked about, the need for a course just as the kids come home to the farm. And it wasn't until COVID really that, I've done a few conferences like this, but I really think the COVID really makes it work. And how this course is structured is it's a 15 modules. It's basically 5 hours. So you spend an hour a day listening to it like a podcast as you do your chores. You don't have to be behind a computer. You can just listen to it on your cell phone. And each day you go through and it asks you questions. So at night for 10, 20 minutes, at the end of the day, when you're in with your rubber duck in your bathtub, print out a questionnaire and ask yourself some really thought-provoking questions about your future and what your family's needs are. And then at the end of the week, you got a 3-hour exam. And basically what I encourage everybody to do is print it out and go climb the silo and sit in the silo, look over top of your farm and spend 3 hours, just thinking about your future. And I guarantee you, as a result, before you start the course, that exam, and 3 hours later, your whole life perspective will be different, and it's a game changer. And then what I'll do is I'll sit down with you one-on-one over Skype, and it's just like we're having this conversation now, and talk about your future, and then I'll sit down with your entire family when everybody's got their answers and figured out what their future is. And then we'll just talk about your farm's future. And it's meant for kids that are just coming home, and it really will improve the odds of your family still farming in 2050. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'll do the first 5 courses I do in Montana for free. It's just as long as you take it as serious as I do. And from that, I think that we should be doing something for the next 20 years. Because I really think that this is going to change the probability of a lot of your members still farming 20 years down the time.
Well, good. Yeah. So for those that are interested, if you either want to look at agriculturestrategy.com or contact me directly, Justin at JLOCH@MontanaFarmersUnion.com. I can get you in contact with Andy and we can get you started. So I want to say thank you, Andy, for your time and answering our questions. Very helpful.
Yeah, and give to the folks back home, just give me a call if today, if you like what the seminar was about, just give me a call. If you have any questions that you didn't want to ask in the group session, just give me a call anytime, 800-474-2057. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Andy.
Take care.
And thanks for those that attended. We'll plan on seeing you tomorrow again at 8:30. Thanks.